Hello everyone! I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today I wanted to talk to y'all about my book review for The Teahouse Fire by Joyce Avery. Now, this book is a work of fiction. The story itself did not historically happen, but a lot of the cultural and historical aspects of the time period for this story, as well as a lot of the experiences that the characters have, are historical in nature. This follows the main character, a young girl by the name of Aurelia, and she is originally from France. And what's so interesting about this book, it's really the only one of its kind that I've seen thus far, and I really enjoyed it. So this takes place during the late 1800s, early 1900s, when Japan is really starting to get into trade with other countries again, and is also becoming a little bit more westernized. So during the Meiji period, when the emperor had a lot of interest in Western culture and people started to kind of start dressing more in Western style clothes rather than traditional kimono. And this is something that happens very slowly, progressively over the course of the story, as any of these sorts of cultural changes are. So this is where we really see the beginning of that time period that a lot of people know best with Japanese history, where Japan kind of starts becoming more interested in Western culture and begins to have a little bit more modernity in their daily life. So technology and things like that coming to Japan and changing their daily lives and making daily tasks easier. And so Aurelia, how exactly does a French girl get to Japan? Well, also during this time period, this is also when a lot of Christian religious missionaries went to Japan in the hopes of converting the people to Christianity. And as some of y'all probably know from pop culture movies, that didn't go so well. The Japanese people were not very excited about the idea of Christianity, and a lot of the missionaries that went over there were at best ignored and not taken seriously, and at worst had very bad things happen to them. So her uncle, his name is Uncle Charles, is the religious missionary that ends up being assigned to Japan. And he is living with Aurelia and her mother. Fortunately, her mother is incredibly ill and she ends up dying. This isn't really a spoiler alert because it happens within like the first couple chapters of the story. So I'm not really spoiling anything for y'all because it's literally story's got a story. We got to go to Japan somehow. So her mother dies and Uncle Charles becomes Aurelia's legal guardian. He takes her with him to Japan. He has quite nefarious goals for being her legal guardian, and he's really gross. And so I do warn you that that part of the story is a little bit upsetting, but I will say, just to put your fears at rest, he does not manage to do anything to Aurelia. He's just creepy and gross. And the reason why is because of the title of the story, The Teahouse Fire, in that the place that they're living in catches on fire, and so he ends up burning to death. So hooray for bad people meeting appropriate ends. But Aurelia, obviously, escapes the fire and she runs away to a neighboring tea house known as the Baishin. And so this is owned by the Shin family. And at this point, Aurelia is really young. Like, I would say she's something like 10 years old at this point in the story. Like, she's a child. And so they take her in. And at the time, she doesn't speak like any Japanese other than the very basic stuff that her and her uncle got taught on the way to Japan by the emissaries. So, you know, basic like, hello, my name is, please and thank you sort of stuff. She doesn't know how to actually talk to anybody. But that's okay because she's really young. And on top of it, her mother knew 4 different languages. And so she's instilled this love of languages into Aurelia, and she already also speaks other languages. So picking up Japanese was not exactly difficult for her given her age and her mother also instilling this ability in her. So slowly but surely, the Shin family helps her to learn Japanese and just kind of be adopted into their way of life. She's also lucky in that she's able to kind of blend in as an ugly Japanese person as they kind of introduce her to the other people in their family and the people in their neighborhood and the people that they work with and stuff like that, in that she has like dark brown hair and she has paler skin and she isn't like super tall in terms of being a European person. She's short for a European person, but obviously still kind of tall for a Japanese person. So they're just like, yeah, she didn't come out quite right. It's fine. To hide the fact that she's a foreigner, because during this time period, they were still very wary of foreigners. They were very xenophobic. They did not like foreigners. So the idea of the Shins adopting a foreign girl would not have gone well for anybody. So they just kind of pretend that she's the daughter of some distant relative that's a little wonky, and she's adopted into their family. And so she learns about the way of tea, Chanoyu, and how tea ceremonies performed and just all of the aspects into that. And this book is actually what inspired me to write that aspect of my novel, Geisha Hands. That whole big scene that I have with Yuki performing tea ceremony for Minoru, and all of that was inspired by this book. I just fell in love with the entire process that they have for tea ceremony. I mean, it starts with the type of charcoal that they use in order to boil the water for the tea. I mean, it gets that just minutia of detail of what kind of charcoal they're using for that, what kind of pot they're using to boil the water, what kind of tea they're using, what utensils they use, just all of that. And I just fell in love with that entire process, and they just talk about it in infinite detail in this book. So if you love the idea of Japanese tea ceremony, this book is definitely for you. And so it's also kind of about the fact that the Shin family knows she's a foreigner, so she's this other. And then on top of it, society at large treats her as other because, she's not up to their beauty standards. She's seen as being kind of slow because she doesn't really understand language and cultural things the way that people around her do. She's learning at a much slower pace than everybody else. So people don't treat her very nicely. And so it's a lot of that conflict of culture going on, and her just learning her place in the world as best as she can, and learning how to just basically fit in with her new family, because if it weren't for them, she would be on the street. Like, she literally has nowhere to go. She has no living relatives left, and she's a foreigner in Japan of all places. Like, it's compared to France, it's the other side of the world. So having to come to terms with all of that while coming of age as a young girl is really tough. And she is definitely a tough cookie as a character, and it's just amazing, her perseverance throughout this story and her willingness to learn. And she does sometimes stand up for herself. She doesn't just simply roll over and take it every time that people are mean to her and treat her like crap, but she also understands the idea of when to pick your battles and all of that. When is it truly important for her to stand up for herself, as opposed to, this isn't that important and it's just going to cause me more problems than it is going to help me. And so going through all of that is just so relatable, especially because when I was younger, I was bullied. And so that was highly relatable to me, that, you just have the world around you at large just being really crappy at you for really no real reason. And just having to go through that and deal with that and picking your battles and stuff was really relatable to me. And then as well as learning about a lot of these different aspects of Japanese culture and learning about that particular time period when, Western fashion was starting to become trendy in Japan. One detail that I thought was just so adorable, and I actually looked it up, and this was a real thing, y'all, is that they got really into Western shoes, specifically with the men. They really liked the idea of Western leather shoes. And so particularly, they liked how they squeaked, the leather creaking. And so they actually would go out of their way to have these leather Western shoes custom made in a way that when they walked, they would be super squeaky. And that was really trendy in Japan during this time period. And I just little details like that, I just think are so cute and so fun. And you just learning about things like that. I love those kinds of things about these kinds of books, and just the doors it can open for you in terms of interest and inspiration for your own stories and stuff like that. So there's just a lot of fun little nuggets in this story like that I'm sure that if you're a fan of Japanese culture, you will absolutely enjoy. This book also, surprisingly, is also an LGBTQ book, in that Aurelia starts to kind of realize as she comes of age and as most young people start to become interested in people, she starts to realize that she's more interested is her friend Inko, who is also kind of in the same situation as her in that she is a maid at a geisha house, and she's also kind of treated like crap just because that's kind of her station in life. Just because of her position, that kind of determines how she's treated and stuff. And they find solace in each other. And just seeing that really beautiful relationship unfold from a really beautiful friendship, and also that they have to keep it secret. Because during this time period, that kind of relationship was really frowned upon, even though it was kind of a thing that was kind of known back then, especially with geisha houses, when you have that many women who live independently, and a lot of them typically have no interest in getting married because then they lose their ability to make their own money and make their own choices and have their independence. And there were some of them that did form those kinds of relationships. It was, you know, kind of the whole like special friends, roommates sort of situation thing going on there. But because they're both seen as servants in their households, that was especially frowned upon, because they didn't even like their servants having heterotypical relationships, because then that meant that they were going to be distracted with making, you know, googly eyes at some dude instead of carrying out their duties, as well as then the household would lose them as a servant, because then they would go to live with their husband instead of serving the house they live in. So there's a whole lot of different dynamics going on there with these interpersonal relationships, and then also how the different members of the household treat Aurelia, and then her having to watch how different members of Inka's household treat Inka. And so watching how all of these interpersonal relationships develop, with how Aurelia is treated with her siblings and other members of her household of the Shin family, and then also her having to watch on the sidelines with Inko and how she is treated in her household, and the fact that there really isn't a whole lot she can do to help Inko, which is really sad and frustrating for her. But then also Aurelia coming into her own with tea ceremony, that she learns the ways of it and she learns how to perform it. And just, it's amazing that she is given that privilege of that knowledge, and then on top of it, having the privilege of being able to perform tea ceremony, even though she is this other. And so that's a really special aspect of the story. And I just love how the story unfolds. It kept me guessing along the way. I never knew really what was going to happen next. There are just so many different things that happen. There's a lot of different interpersonal relationships with the different characters in the story that happen, especially with Aurelia's siblings. There's a lot of drama that goes on in the Shin house, and it is just exciting to watch all of it unfold. And it really takes a lot of these traditional tropes from Japanese literature about different ideas of romance and what it means to be in love and all of that. So it's a really beautiful story, and I highly recommend it. And I just learned so much about tea ceremony, and it inspired me to do my own research about tea ceremony and eventually write that stuff for my novel Geisha Hands. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video and found it helpful, and I hope it inspires you to read the Teahouse Fire. So if you like this video, please be sure to give it a like, and if you're new, subscribe. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.